Okay, well, Sharon, thank you so much for that welcome, and thank you all for being here first thing in the morning. Really excited to have this conversation because, as you heard from Sharon, we have represented today perspectives from both the public and the private sector. And getting these diverse perspectives in conversations about energy transition and about climate solutions is so, so important. So as Sharon mentioned, I am the co-host of the ESG Insider podcast, and this is a podcast you can find wherever you get your podcasts. We're also an official podcast of the Nest Climate Campus. And one thing we cover a lot is how do you bring solutions to the table? So let's start with you today, Dr. Chan. If you could talk to us a little bit about some of the work that DOE is doing to advance emerging climate technologies.
Sure. One of the most exciting things that has happened over the past 3.5 years is the passage of Bill and IRA. It led to $500 billion, $500 billion going towards climate change and really the clean energy transition. Now that is a lot of money, but it pales in comparison to the 23 trillion that the private sector has. And so really what we've been focused on is having a government catalyzed, private sector led energy transition. And so what we're doing is using that $500 billion to help buy down risk to the point where the private sector can really step in. And it's been working. A couple of stats I want to share with you. For every dollar going out the door from DOE, we've had $6 of private sector capital coming in, which is exactly what we're trying to do, private sector led, government enabled. And at the end of this year, we will have added enough clean electricity to the grid to power 30 Hoover dams, 30 Hoover dams. So this is really catalyzing that transition, which is what really makes me excited.
Excellent, and we're here today on stage with AT&T, obviously. Shannon, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the collaboration that you've been doing with the DOE?
Sure, well first I should say I personally don't have access to those trillions. I wish that I did. So yeah, we've had a long-standing relationship with the DOE, very proud relationship with the DOE, great collaborators. One of the things in particular is working with Argonne National Labs as part of the DOE, and that relationship goes back about 7 years now. And what we do is we actually get the climate data, some of the best climate data available in the world from Argonne. We take that climate data and we integrate it into, selfishly, right, integrate it into our own network systems just to make sure that our network is prepared for the future impacts of climate change. So think if you're a network designer and you're going through your normal workflow, you have all these variables that you look at. Well, now we actually produce a climate risk score that actually gives them a very clear indication of what the climate risk is at that location, so they can either go to another location or build at that location and just take the right steps to make sure we're mitigating risk at that location. We also are very excited, it's been in the public domain for a while now, but we launched along with the DOE and FEMA a climate risk resiliency tool we call Climber. It is available to everybody and anybody in the public domain. Right now it's a lot of hazard risk mitigation managers at local municipalities use it, but we're trying to get the word out so anybody who wants access to really good climate data can do that.
Okay, 2 follow-up questions. Where can people access it if they want to?
You just look up Climber, C-L-I-M-R-R, and I believe it's climber.org, but it's out there in the public domain. If you just Google that, you will absolutely find it.
And second question, what is the use case that you see for that?
Sure, I mean, there's lots of use cases. It's just to get better informed, if nothing else. But imagine you're a city manager or a hazard mitigation plan manager for a local municipality, and you're trying to understand what your climate risk is, whether it's from flood, wildfire, heat, drought. You can actually go in and get the information to put into your hazard mitigation planning. So you have that future thinking, you have that climate-informed decision-making as you're making your plan for the city.
Okay, great. We were talking in the green room, Dr. Chan, and you mentioned a little bit about the importance that you see, the important role of public-private partnerships. Tell me a little bit more about why that's so important and how DOE is approaching that.
The reason why I think it's so critical is that this idea that the public sector can really help support the private sector in a way that is transformative. And the public sector is able to bring their weight into the partnerships. And I think the thing that's important is the private sector is one that is closest to the market, so they know what has to happen. We have the weight of the government to help support those solutions. And what I really love about the partnership between AT&T and DOE is the fact that originally you guys had developed this to help with your own climate planning and all that. But then they saw that, wait a minute, this this tool is so important for the nation, because we are all worrying about wildfire, we're
That's right.
all worrying about infrastructure, and making it publicly available is really, really critical. And one of the things that we ended up doing was then taking that same data and that same tool, and the Grid Deployment Office is actually funding a program to use Climber to help tribal nations. And so this idea of putting public-private partnerships in a way that AT&T and DOE has is so critical, because in the end, what we're doing is really trying to transform the nation. And that the thing I love about AT&T is you weren't thinking just about your own competitiveness, but really how do you go back and give back to the nation?
Right. And there's that initial conversation of once we get the data and we realize how good it is, and we start implementing it, you can kind of flirt with the idea of like, oh, should we keep this for ourselves, right, as a competitive differentiator? But it becomes clear, it does no good for AT&T to be climate resistant in a vacuum. We need everybody to be climate resilient, not just AT&T. So that's why we made the data publicly available.
Which makes sense, because fires don't care if it's AT&T
That's right.
or somebody else. And I think the thing that's really exciting, I don't know if you know this, but right now there's 3,000 active users downloading data from it every month. And so that's really incredible, that kind of impact.
So clearly big demands and a lot of opportunity for impact. The title of this session is the Technology Toolkit for Climate Action. And what I really like about that is it gives us an opportunity to talk concrete solutions, not just high-level ideas. I'd like to dig into a few more of the emerging technologies where you see a lot of promise. And maybe, Dr. Chan, I can start by just asking you, where do you see the most promise? What are you most excited about when it comes to emerging climate technologies?
So we have an entire suite of technologies that we really need to be driving towards if we're going to hit our climate goals. And so one of the things that we were very focused on was how do we actually make sure the entire ecosystem is aware of these. So there's 11 technologies that we've really been focused on that you can look and find information on at the Pathways to Commercial Liftoff, which you can find at liftoff.energy.gov. And it's long duration energy storage, carbon management, nuclear, virtual power plants, innovative grid. And the thing that's really important about all of these is I don't have a favorite.
Okay.
It's like asking you which one's your favorite kid, because they're all important. They all have to play a role. We need clean firm, which means nuclear plays a role. We need solar and wind, but we have to pair it with long duration energy storage, because when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, we actually can store that energy and use it later. So I really encourage everyone to go to liftoff.energy.gov to read more about these technologies, because these are the ones that we have to drive towards. It's kind of like Pokemon. You got to collect them all. And so if we collect them all, we'll get where we need to get to.
I'm learning all about Pokemon from my kids. And by the way, they do ask me daily who is my favorite of my kids. So when it comes to understanding how companies can go beyond where they are currently, what is the path forward to getting from where we are now to really encouraging companies to do uptake of new technologies, to try something new?
So anyone who's done commercialization knows that the really critical thing is we have to get these technologies to the point where they're cost effective. Yeah. Raise your hand if you want to pay more for something. I have yet to have anyone raise their hand on that, which means that if the technology is not cost competitive, it's not going to take off. Now, in order to get cost competitive, what you have to do is get to scale. But if you are building something out, the first 10 of a kind of something oftentimes is not at scale. So really what I think we have to do is reframe the way in which we think about the risk that we're willing to take early on to get these technologies to the tipping point. And so what I've been talking to a lot of people over the last few days at Climate Week is how do we rethink the risk versus finance approach, and are we willing to take more risk, take a little bit of a hit on return on investment, so that in the end we may have a little bit of a loss leader in the first 10 of a kind, but it then opens up the entire market to really grow. And I think that's really the key thing, is we have to think about things in a different way when it comes to financial risk we're willing to take.
I mean, that's a big challenge, I would think. How do you get companies to be willing to take that kind of risk? Is this something that AT&T thinks about?
Absolutely. I think, when you talk about the technologies itself, it does, as Dr. Chan indicates, has to be all of the above kind of approach, right? But you have to be willing to invest. There's just no way around it. And within the sustainability world, there's a constant push and pull of competing for capital with traditional ROIs. And I just think that's part of being, in a corporate world, quite frankly. And that's okay. I think on the environmental side, we have lots of ways to do that. And then I think what corporations understand is good old-fashioned risk management, right? And part of how we're able to get the funding for the climate data was just making, I would say, a common sense business case to our leadership of, look, we know that the weather is changing. We know there's going to be extreme weather events that our physical infrastructure is going to be particularly susceptible to. So let's invest now, right? We can't tell you exactly how much we're going to get back, but we know, right, that where it's 3 feet of flooding today, it's going to be 6 feet tomorrow. Where there's no flooding today, it's going to be 3 feet tomorrow. So, you know, our leaders listen and they're willing to invest, and that's how we're able to do this. I think when it comes to technology as well, I'm going to steal this from somebody. They talked about the great thing about low-hanging fruit is it always grows back. So when I think about renewables and transitioning EVs, sometimes I think folks think about it as the low-hanging fruit at this point, but there's still so much more to do. And any chance I get, I always talk about the issue with EVs is not the EVs, it's the EV infrastructure. I would love for us to come together and solve for that. In terms of emerging technologies, you know, we do all types of proof of concept work. You know, whether it's looking at geothermal HVAC units, whether it's looking at motionless wind turbines that you can put on top of rooftops. So there's lots of innovation out there. You just have to be willing to go seek it and at a minimum pilot it, proof of concept it.
Okay, and I'm not asking you to pick a favorite, but can you tell us about some of the concrete examples to help our audience get their heads around, you know, the direction of travel for new technologies?
Yeah, I think the key thing is all these technologies all play a role. And the ones I really want to highlight are the ones which are in the here and now in terms of the technology has been proven. There's actually business cases which show that if you were to use this technology, companies can actually make money. And we recently took a step back, looked at the 11 reports and really understand how do these things work together in order to help with this surge in electricity demand because of AI and data centers. And there's two things I want to highlight. One is innovative grid deployment. So with the grid, we actually have technologies that are proven. Reconductoring, which is basically putting new types of materials into existing wires to make them more efficient. Dynamic line rating, which is basically really looking at the demand, the surge and flow, and understanding how to match that. And those, if we implement them, can actually expand the existing grid by 30%, which is massive. But right now we're not seeing the uptake because the value chain is so complicated. Getting people to put these things in when it's like a fraction of the price of building a new grid. It's 5% of the cost of building a new grid to actually do these types of technologies. The second is virtual power plants. And so the idea of a virtual power plant is if we have bidirectional charging of, say, vehicles, you could be charging your car at home at night, drive into the office, and then discharge the grid during peak times. So that's what we call virtual power plants. If we're able to do those things, we actually can meet the demand, the surge in demand in the next 10 years, which then buys us time for things like long duration energy storage, nuclear, and others, which have a lot more things they have to figure out before they can really scale in the market. And so really, I really encourage people to look at virtual power plants and the innovative grid, because those are things that are the here and now that can solve our current surge in demand.
And you've mentioned long duration energy storage a couple times. For anyone in our audience who's not familiar, what should they know about that?
So long duration energy storage is basically really big batteries that are able to store energy for more than 10 hours in terms of the discharge to the grid. And so the reason why this is so critical is with renewable energy, so solar and wind, if we can't capture and store that energy, then it makes it really hard for us to be able to use it, to use the energy when it's actually, the wind's not blowing or the sun isn't shining. So it's giving a way for renewable energies to be clean, firm power by coupling all the renewable energy with long duration energy storage.
Got it. Thank you for the explanation. So Shannon, we've heard discussion of some of the challenges. There are a lot of opportunities in emerging climate technologies, but the uptake isn't there. We've heard from Dr. Chan. From your perspective, what is the biggest hurdle to uptake of these emerging technologies?
Well, I think the biggest hurdle, won't be a surprise to anybody, is scalability, right, the solutions. But there's ways to solve for that, right? I think one of it is organizations, whether it's a corporation or not, going out and proactively looking, right, for those opportunities. And then I think you take advantage for of what's out there. So for example, we collaborate with the Rocky Mountain Institute and the Third Derivative. They do a lot of startups. They connect startups with corporations, and that always doesn't result, right, in collaborations, but sometimes it does. And I think whether it's the third derivative or other kind of incubators, accelerators, you have to proactively go out there and participate in those, because that's where most of the new kind of cutting edge technology is coming from, or at least a lot of it is coming from there, is those small businesses that are just starting out, looking for funding, trying to scale, trying to find the right partners for the solutions, and we've had a lot of success in that.
Okay, excellent. What would you respond to that? From your perspective, biggest hurdle, biggest challenge to the uptake?
I think the biggest hurdle and challenge is the fear of being the first. I feel like we're in the Squid Games right now, where everyone is first in line to be 8th or 9th. No one is in first line to be first, second, or third. They're like, you go. No, you go. I'm not going to go. And then, look, we can't all just sit there and wait. We don't have time. And it's kind of like, when you have a project, then you're a senior in high school, the longer you wait, it's not like the work goes away, it's the less time you have to get stuff done. And so we, tell our teenagers to start doing their work now. We need to start doing our work now. We have to be willing to take that risk. And so I think really what we need to do is rethink how quickly we're able to move, rethink this return on investment, and really collectively spread the risk around, because if each of us takes a little bit of the risk and a little bit of the financial hit, it's not that scary. And so I really think what I am trying to get us towards is the financing of the first 10 of a kind, collectively as an ecosystem, because to me that is the tipping point at which point we can really scale these technologies and all of us actually have a sustainable economic model to bring these to market.
Okay, and we're having this discussion, of course, at Climate Week, and also the UN General Assembly is happening, so a lot of key decision makers from the business and government communities here this week. Who are you trying to reach with this message? Who do you think needs to hear what?
Everybody. I mean, because look, in the end, one of the things that we're thinking about is, if you think about an ecosystem, right? And let's use like nuclear, geothermal, and so forth, right? Philanthropy can play a role. Private sector companies who are actually using technology can play a role. The government can play a role in terms of the subsidies, incentives that we have. The people who are actually building these can also take a role, because do they need to make as much money as they do on the first 10 of a kind? I think the boards of the private companies need to also be playing a role, because they need to be thinking beyond the tenure of a CEO, which is only 3 to 4 years. We actually need people to make investments now that may benefit a CEO 2 or 3 down the road. And it's really hard for CEOs to do that when they have the quarterly earnings. So it's literally everybody, and the consumers and customers have to demand it. I know my kids in this next generation want it. And so we have to do right by them. Unfortunately, they don't have the money right now to go do what they have to do, but we need to get everyone activated.
And it's a challenge, right? Because you're talking about, and we're all talking about this week, when the theme is It's Time, we're talking about how do you take immediate, concrete actions that are going to play out over the very long term. So how do you change this mindset to something much more long term? How are you approaching that at AT&T, this question of long-term versus short-term?
That's come up a lot, is how do you set long-term goals but take immediate action towards those goals? And I think, education, and so it's 3 things, right? You have to educate everybody, literally, right? And that's all through the company in terms of who's going to be impacted. Also, I just have to say, smart policy is super important. Right? I think that sounds obvious, but I think sometimes we take that for granted. We need really smart policy to make all this work. Within a corporation or like AT&T itself, you have to educate your leaders, and you have to make it simple for them to understand, because a lot of this climate work that we do is really complicated. So the challenge is, how do we simplify that messaging for our leaders who don't do this every single day for it to resonate for them to make the right decisions? And then, look, the economics have to work. Whether it's short-term, long-term, the economics have to work, because there's so much pressure, right, on earnings. There's so much pressure on stock for public companies that you have to make the economics work. But I think the advantage in the environmental sustainability field in particular is we have a lot of opportunity to do that, and we do take advantage of that.
And the economics will work if we hit that tipping point.
Correct.
So I think this situation is we're all waiting for someone else to get us to the tipping point. But if you go to liftoff.energy.gov, that's liftoff.energy.gov, we actually go through all the unit economics for these different technologies and how do we actually have to get there. So if you're curious of what the pathway is, we have these commercialization roadmaps which actually lay all of this out, and the work that we have to do as an ecosystem to commercialize hydrogen, geothermal, and so forth.
Okay, so we're just about out of time, but I think to wrap up, what we're hearing is that smart policy plays a role, public-private partnerships play a role, communication is really key. How do you get this message to a wide group of leaders who maybe aren't doing this every day as their day job? And then how do you balance the immediate short-term decisions with what's going to benefit in the long term? Have I missed anything there?
That's it.
No, that's very easy, guys. Come on, we got this.
Well, please join me in thanking our panelists for this great discussion today. Thank you. Thank you both.